Hello everyone, today we are doing a super simple sunset. This is for complete beginners. Today we will be practicing the brush techniques of wet on wet and wet on dry. For this I do suggest that you use either A5 watercolour paper, or what I do is I chop my A4 in half. Just because it's a smaller area to paint, so it makes it a lot easier. I am just using two brushes today, and that is going to be a flat brush and my size 10 round brush. And all I want you to do is pick three colours, two for the sky and one for the mountains that we're going to do. I suggest that you use two sunsetty sort of colours for the sky, obviously, and then a darker, cooler colour for the mountains. Today I am using these three colours, which is, excuse me if I say it wrong, quinacridone magenta. I am using cad red, and then I'm using dusk violet for the mountains. I will be using straight from the tube, so if you are a watercolour expert, please find something else to watch now.
And if you are new to watercolour painting, I have got something really helpful for you. I have created a free watercolour cheat sheet that's available to download from my website. It just covers some basic brush techniques and some basic colour theory. You can either print it out to keep it in your workspace or keep it on your device to pull up when you need it. But it's totally free, so head on over to get your free cheat sheet. So let's get started painting.
Crafts, it's closed crafts.
So I'm just going to cover the materials that I'm using in the painting today. Firstly, I'll be using my flat brush. We'll be using it for our first layer, which is called a wash. It's good to get the colour down quickly and consistently. And then the second brush is my size 10 round brush, which will be for the mountains and more detail. Both the brushes have synthetic bristles, but that's just personal choice. I am using quinacridone magenta by De La Rone. For the mountains, I'll be using dusk violet by Van Gogh. And then what is in the pan, we are using cadmium red light. It has a gorgeous warm orange undertone, which is perfect for the sky. So I'm just using the tiniest little bit of colour and popping it on the palette. You don't need to use a lot of watercolour from the tube because a little does go a long way. Watercolour pigments are so concentrated, so just a small amount mixed with water will give you plenty of colour for your painting. Not only does this help the paints last longer, but it allows you to control the intensity and the transparency of the colour a lot more easily. So the first technique that we are using is wet on wet. So with my flat brush I apply some clean water to the paper. I'm using long strokes going across the whole page of the paper and going up and down the paper as well. We need an even consistency of water on the whole page. We want to make sure there are no puddles of water, however we do still need it quite wet. There should be a nice light sheen across the page. If you do apply too much water, you can always use a paper towel just to dry up some of the excess. Try not to overthink that part too much. And then straight from the tube I am going to apply the magenta. I'm going to use the same sort of strokes that I used before. Make sure you work quickly because it can dry fast. You want to take advantage of the dampness before it evaporates so that your paint blends smoothly. I'm pulling the paint down so it covers around 3/4 of the page. Some people advise against using watercolour straight from the tube, however I love the intensity of the colour and we are only doing one wash. This is usually because they say that it's not as realistic. However, it is personal choice. There's no law against it. Now, about halfway down the page, I bring in the cadmium red light. I'm bringing it up just to blend in with the magenta. Do not worry about the brush strokes right now. As we are working wet on wet, they will blend in together. As we are only doing one wash, I am using a lot of paint, so it's lovely, it's vibrant, it's pretty. And that is the background completed. Like I said earlier, you can still see the brush marks, but as we have worked wet on wet, they will blend out and it will look more smooth. You can either wait for this to dry and go do something else, or you can use a hairdryer like I do. So once it's dry, just double check that it is dry. You shouldn't really use your fingers though because you can mess it up, but I never learn. What I didn't do, which was my mistake, was remove the excess paint and water that sits around the masking tape. All you would do is get a paper towel and absorb some of the excess that is sitting there. I'm not very good at learning from my own mistakes. However, it is good practice because in the end it doesn't look very neat if you don't do it. Now I'm going to use my round brush and I will start to make the mountains. Before I start painting directly onto the paper, I'm using a swatch to get a good understanding of the dusk violet mixture. This will help you see how much water to add to get the right transparency. I'll keep adding more and more water until I'm happy with the transparency. I'll be applying the paint straight to the paper without a layer of water first, and this is what's called the wet on dry technique. So now that I'm happy with the swatch, I'll apply the dusk violet across the horizon line, creating the mountain. I'm using quite jaggedy movements here just to get that rough mountain shape. I have mixed a lot of water with this colour. This makes the colour more transparent, giving the effect that the mountain is further away. You might also notice that some of the sunset colours from earlier are seeping through this layer. This is actually a good thing. It adds a natural touch as if the sunset light is bouncing off the mountain. Just keep your brush strokes light and blend as needed. This technique really helps to push the distant elements back and makes your painting feel more three-dimensional. I'm going to bring the paint further down than I think I'll need for the second mountain. But before we add that second mountain, we need to make sure that the paint is dry. Once the first mountain has dried, we can move on to painting the second mountain, which is going to be closer to us in the scene. For this part, instead of using darker colours like you might with other mediums, we're going to use a different approach. We'll add more of the dusk violet itself, but with less water. This will make the colour more vibrant and intense, which helps create the illusion that the mountain is closer to us. I am going back to the wet on wet technique to add some subtle blending and create a smoother transition. This technique will help soften the edges and give the mountain a more natural integrated look. By applying the water before adding more pigment, I can achieve those beautiful flowing gradients. I am adding a lot more pigment to the second mountain. This intensifies the colour and makes it stand out more, creating a stronger contrast with the first mountain, which now looks even further away. I have also left a deliberate gap between the first and second mountain to emphasise the depth and layering in the scene. The sunset layer, still quite prominent, is giving a beautiful effect as it reflects off of the first mountain. This adds a lovely glow and helps maintain that sense of atmospheric perspective. Once I'm happy with the amount of pigment on the second mountain, I'll use the flat brush with clean water to gently pull the paint down a little bit, blending it smoothly. However, as you can see, I made a small mistake. I forgot to wipe off the excess water from the brush before applying it to the painting. This has caused some unwanted pooling, but don't worry, it's not the end of the world. All you need to do is pick up the excess water with a clean piece of kitchen roll. This will help correct the issue and keep the painting just the way you want it. Now that I'm happy with it, I'm going to dry it with the hairdryer before I move on to the last mountain. For the last mountain, I will be using more paint than the other two. This mountain is going to be very dark and striking, creating a strong contrast that will make it stand out dramatically in the painting. I am using the wet on dry technique here, which means I'm applying the paint directly onto dry paper. This method allows me to achieve a nice crisp edge on the mountain, making it distinct and bold. Once again, I use my flat brush with clean water to pull down some of the paint. Since I've used plenty of pigment, this allows for smooth blending while maintaining the rich dark intensity of the colour. This technique helps to soften any harsh lines and integrate the mountain seamlessly into the rest of the scene while still keeping a strong and striking presence. Here I'm just adding a bit more pigment. Then I add even more pigment with my flat brush to ensure that the paint extends as far down as possible. This will help deepen the mountain's colour and enhance its impact while ensuring a seamless blend into the rest of the painting. Then I add even more pigment in random places on the mountain to create texture. This adds some variation and interest, making the surface of the mountain look more natural and dynamic. To enhance the texture, I use tissue paper to lift off some of the paint, a technique known as lifting. This can add interesting texture and variation. However, in the end, I decided that the lifted areas weren't quite right for this piece, so I ended up painting over them to achieve the look that I wanted. After drying the paper completely, I went in with a wet on wet technique for the final layer. This smoothed out the texture that I didn't like and blends everything seamlessly, giving the mountain a polished and more cohesive look. I did a very small amount of lifting at the end, but it wasn't as distinct as before and I was quite happy with the way it turned out. Now that I'm happy with the piece, it's time to remove the masking tape. Keep in mind the edges might be slightly messy because I forgot to remove the excess paint earlier. It's a good reminder to learn from my mistakes and keep improving. I always use a hairdryer to loosen masking tape before removing it. This helps the tape come off more cleanly and reduces the risk of tearing the paper. Creating this painting is perfect for complete beginners. It's simple yet effective, allowing you to practice essential watercolour techniques without feeling overwhelmed. Step-by-step approach helps build confidence and skills, making it an excellent starting point for anyone new to watercolour. Here's a reminder that you can grab a free watercolour cheat sheet from the link in the description. A good tip for this painting is to set a 15-minute timer. This encourages you to work more efficiently. Remember that drying time doesn't need to be included in the 15 minutes. Just focus on the painting itself. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment and subscribe. I'd love to hear from you. Comment below the 3 colours that you'd like to use in this painting. Thanks for watching and happy creating.
Enclosed class, closed crafts. We have a laugh, closed crafts.